0500. Just remember that, 0500. So 80 years ago, already, the paratroopers had already manifested and had moved out. And so they were going to have a long night 80 years ago. Now, pretty soon, those Rangers that are going to assault Pointe du Hoc are going to load their landing craft about 02:30 in the morning. Of course, that assumes that the landing craft are out. So the coxswains had to deploy those landing craft. And that's happening literally 80 years ago right now. And so just a amazing thing to keep in mind, an incredible sacrifice. I have to say, Dr. John, it was great to be on Omaha Beach with you today. Appreciate that, to kind of walk those sands. And, really is a pretty special moment. As much friction as we'll encounter, I think it'll also be an incredible memory as we go forward. But, thinking of those Rangers for Pointe du Hoc, tonight we have Dr. Nick Mueller. You guys know him. Founder, president, CEO Emeritus, just an amazing advocate for the National World War II Museum. And so with that, Nick, without further eloquence, over to you for Pointe du Hoc.
All right. Thank you. I guess I'm mic'd up. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Good. Well, welcome everybody, and a big thank you in behalf of the National World War II Museum that you are here to celebrate and commemorate here in the last few days and the days still ahead. And I want to also give a shout out to all of our great historians who have been giving you outstanding presentations, both here every evening and on various buses and tours during the time that we have been here so far. Much more to come, as you have heard. Well, we all know this is the 80th anniversary, and that's why we're on this ship. But I'd just like to say a couple things before I get into the topic, that this anniversary of D-Day brings us all back to an international site of memory, a site of memory that will still be remembered thousands of years from now, just like the great invasions of ancient Greece when Persia came to destroy the tiny Greek city-states that gave birth to democracy in 1066. William the Conqueror going across the channel here the other direction. So this is a day that we will remember, you will remember, and participate in those ceremonies and the events around the day. And standing on the beaches, walking through the hedgerows on these almost sacred grounds, I know gives everyone a special sense of the gravity of that moment some 80 years ago. The stakes were very, very high for America, for the Allies, and for world history on that day. It was an existential moment in the war, a pivot point at the moment we pierced Hitler's Atlantic Wall. And it was critical to our survival. Everything pointed toward that moment in World War II. And our freedom and our democracy was at stake. We're going to talk today about the Battle of Pointe du Hoc. You can see the craters there from the bombing, and we'll talk about that when 225 Rangers, a special op of the 2nd Ranger and the 5th Ranger battalions. And we have here in the front row Texas Aggies. I think I got pinned tonight with the Texas Aggies. But no, our friends at Georgia Tech, I'm equally happy to have a pin from Georgia Tech as well. But this was a day that crowned the Rangers in glory, and it's one that I think you'll understand. And some of you today heard from one of those Rangers, John Ron, who Mike Byland apparently zoomed in on his phone for. A few of you got to hear the officer, Captain John Ron, who went in on Omaha Beach with the 5th Rangers headquarter company. And he's still alive at 102 in Orlando, and I've talked with him frequently, and I know Mike Byland calls him almost every week, but it was a special thrill for some of you. He's the only officer, I think, of D-Day who is still alive. So to be able to have a few words from him was important. So I'm going to talk about today some aspects of this battle that you may not know. It wasn't just D-Day, but it really covered 3 days, June 6, 7, and 8. And the back end of that story happens back toward the back of those fields back there that you see in the front. So it's not just the front. And I want you to I'm going to have several of the slides that's the sliver of beach there that we're going to talk about. I'm not a military historian. You've heard from our military historians, European diplomatic historian, but I've learned a little bit about World War II, as you can imagine, over the years, and I've had an opportunity to walk the site in different areas, and been actually on that beach with Steve Ambrose back in the 90s. One time we took a boat to get us over there. No, we did not climb the cliffs. We were smart enough not to try to do that. But this is an important site of public memory, and that moves me forward. I'm going to move forward and then backward a little bit, and I'm going to jump into the battle. But the flash forward, if I can get this thing working here, takes us to President Ronald Reagan in 1984. When he returned to this spot for the 40th anniversary of D-Day, with 62 of the Rangers who were still alive, who attended that historic event on that day. He said these words, among others: "We're here to mark the day in history when the Allied armies joined in the battle to reclaim the continent for victory. For 4 long years, much of Europe had been under a terrible shadow. Free nations had fallen. Jews cried out in camps. Millions cried for its rescue. Here in Normandy, the rescue began. Here the Allies stood and fought against tyranny in a giant undertaking unparalleled in human history." So I think he sets the tone and the context and the gravity of the situation that was being commemorated here in front of those veterans, and a few of them I'll mention in the course of my remarks. Now flashing backwards to 3 people who are important to the story, and it gives me a chance to say something quickly about the National World War II Museum. Of course, the 2 in World War II were General Eisenhower and Andrew Higgins. And General Eisenhower told Stephen Ambrose in 1967, or asked him, I should say, if he ever knew Andrew Higgins. And Stephen, young historian that he was at the time, editing the Eisenhower paper, said, "No, I never got to know him. He died before I got to New Orleans." And he says, "Too bad, young man, because he's the man who won World War II with the boats that he designed for that battle, for that invasion, and other invasions as well." And thus began the idea, or formed the idea, that led to the National D-Day Museum and ultimately the World War II Museum. But these boats were critically important to this amphibious assault. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole invasion because John McManus did a brilliant job of that yesterday. But just to remind you again, you've got 150,000 men pouring down here through the English Channel overnight on the 5th and 6th of June. This concentration of force that had been preparation for a year and a half already now was coming to fore, and the 11,000 planes and 5,000 ships. I mean, this was a gigantic undertaking. It had to be kept secret till the moment of the invasion, and it was. That will probably be the only time in world history that such an invasion, or any invasion, could be done in secret, and it was even amazing at that time. Hitler didn't know when or where, as you've heard, but they certainly knew it was coming, and to come it did. Now, we've said that you heard from John Caratola that this landing, if this amphibious assault was was a great gamble. It was tremendous risk. It's a very complex operation. The challenges to amphibious landings were always great, and he gave you all kinds of nuances about terrain and sand and soil and topography that once you get there, all those important. But going back to the Greeks that I mentioned before, the rules are simple and straightforward. The challenges are, at least, first of all, you have to get your troops ashore fast, and that means boats. And that's what Higgins provided, and they were a technological, innovative marvel. You have to attack out of water. Think about that, attacking out of water against heavily defended shores, and you have to supply out of water. And these are all tremendous challenges to an invading force. So then you ask, well, why in the world did we forget about amphibious training, amphibious doctrine between the two world wars? Why? It seems crazy. And John Curatola talked about it. The Marines kept the idea afloat, but alive. But it wasn't until 1939 or 40 we began to realize that we needed boats to attack the enemies, both in Japan and certainly in Europe. Well, because in World War I, they sailed the ships right into ports and offloaded the troops, and they trotted off to war. They never imagined, and this is what military thinkers are supposed to be doing and planners, is they never imagined they would have to attack across 3,000 miles of defended coastline or these islands in the Pacific. So the doctrine was abandoned. There were no boats, literally no boats that could carry men ashore before Higgins came up with his landing craft that were really a miracle. Of course, the other elements were very important: the secrecy, the fact that you had to, and let me just jump here. I do have this video here of just 60 seconds worth.
Throughout the war, Higgins built 20,094 boats. Everyone in New Orleans either worked at Higgins, a relative worked at Higgins, or they knew someone that worked at Higgins. What was done here affected the entire world. The Higgins boats changed the strategy of modern warfare. He gave them the ability for the first time to be able to move men and material from ships at sea to open beaches. No longer did the enemy know where you were going to attack. New Orleanians should be incredibly proud of what this city did during World War II. Because of Mr. Higgins, we saved probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives by giving them the proper equipment to safely land on that beach.
This moment of New Orleans history is part of
Okay, so back to the map a moment here, and just repeat quickly what you heard yesterday or last night. At the far end of it is the Pegasus Bridge operation, protecting that flank from the 21st Panzer Division over to the right of the screen. The airborne came in here to the left behind Utah Beach, protecting the landing craft that were coming there to keep the Germans from attacking the landings there. And of course, Pointe du Hoc is right here in the middle, and we'll say something a lot more about that as we go along. It was going to fall to the 225 men in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, primarily to scale those cliffs and to come right up there to what is now the observation point, still of where the German bunkers were, and where this draw comes up is right near where Lieutenant Colonel Rudder had his command post. But I just want you to look at how wide that beach is there. That's toward the low tide. And what you saw, you'll see again in another slide in a few moments, is when you're getting closer to the high tide. The tide comes in at about 3 feet a minute. And you can't have boats going in there left high and dry if the tide's going out. So that determined the time of day that they had to attack, which on that day was 6:30 a.m., and the water was coming up about halfway at the time. It was kind of what they call half flood. But this is forbidding-looking territory to be climbing up against entrenched defenders, and we're going to understand in a moment just why. It's those guns, and I'm going to show you right up here because this pointer doesn't work right. So here comes in this was the plan. It didn't work out this way. The D Company was going to come in over on this side of the point, but you were looking at this right side right here, and E Company and F were coming in here. Turns out they all come in here, but they're after these 6 big casements and guns here, the French artillery 155 artillery pieces that could reach 12, 13 miles. They could hit both Omaha Beach and Utah Beach and annihilate the landing forces there. So it was critical. These guns just loomed like a dark cloud over in the minds of General Eisenhower and all the SHAEF commanders, worried about what was going to happen if they didn't get rid of those guns. And that was the primary objective. So it's going to fall to, well, let me just go back up here and show on this map a little bit more to give you a little greater sense of it. In fact, this is coming up right away here. So here's Pointe du Hoc. Here's your the 2nd Ranger Landing Forces. There's another Force B, and there was a Force C that was supposed to come in as reinforcements by 7 o'clock. So the landing was supposed to be at 6:30. 7 o'clock, if they didn't get a signal, Force C was going to come around over here to Omaha Beach, and you can see these blue arrows coming here. This is the coastal road, and I'm telling you that right now because the fight is not right here. It comes into this back area down here, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about. So they're going to have a force here going to Pointe de la Percée, and John Ron and headquarters company of the 5th Rangers are going to come up. Now, the plan was to get up there by the same day to relieve the Rangers who were going to go in up the cliffs. So that's in broad strokes the plan. We'll dig a little deeper into it as we go along. Well, this is the guy. Everybody here, the Aggies all know Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder. He was to lead this special operation. Now, he didn't know it, of course, at the outset, and so we'll talk a little bit about the training and the background for these Rangers. But Colonel Rudder was a stocky, tough-talking, no-nonsense guy, one of 6 kids who grew up in Edna, Texas. Good-looking, football. He was a hard-tackling guy. He loved to block, and he went in, called to duty after Pearl Harbor, had several assignments, and then he was charged with going to Camp Forest in Tennessee to begin to organize this elite unit of Rangers. And his speech to them when they arrived, the new recruits, I'm going to work you harder than you've ever worked. In a shorter time than you can imagine, you're going to be the best fighting unit in this man's army. And indeed, the training was incredible. This was nonstop, 24 hours a day, virtually. Drilling, conditioning, 12-mile hikes, 24-mile hikes, obstacle courses, speed marches, log rolling, boxing matches, jiu-jitsu, swimming through rivers, fighting their way through mock battles in swamps. They returned to camp, and the moment an operation was over, they had to be clean, disciplined, and dressed up and ready to go. Think fast or die was the motto. With dirty business, you would learn how to fight and kill every way you could. Weapons training was exhaustive, not just in American weapons, but in German weapons as well. They could use and work with any kind of German machine gun or weapon. They commanded instant loyalty to each other and to Rudder. It was egalitarian, but there was no room for anyone who couldn't make it, who didn't meet the tests of the training. They attracted a lot of recruits. There were a lot of people that wanted to get into the airborne or to the Ranger units. And it wasn't just physical training either. They studied German life. They read Mein Kampf. They learned some basic German words. Know thy enemy was the mantra there. And they trained cliff climbing everywhere. They didn't know why, but they were expert at climbing every kind of trip. They were dropped hundreds of miles from the camp and told, you can get back, you can steal bicycles, you can jump on trains, you can get back, but you got to find a way to get back to camp. And this was attractive to young 18, 19-year-olds. They wanted to be part of this elite unit. There was one guy, Private William Petty, former University of Georgia student. Sorry, it wasn't Georgia Tech, but former Georgia. Now he broke both legs parachuting with the 30th Division of the National Guard, trying to get into the airborne, and he ended up waddling around, had a bad limp, and they said, no, you're not going to be airborne. So he tried to get into the Rangers, and they said, well, you're not going to get into the Rangers either because you've got false teeth. And he just pissed him off. I mean, he just was so mad. He went right to Rudder, and he said, look, they said that I can't be one of the Rangers because I've got a dental malady. And he said, I don't want to eat the Germans. I want to fight them. And Rudder smiled and said, you're in. And anyway, he earned a Silver Star at Pointe du Hoc for killing 30 Nazis, and one of the great heroes of the story there. But I just want to tell you a little bit about this kind of training that they were and the kind of soldiers they were. They were super confident. And what was ahead for them, they needed every bit of that because now you take a look again at these cliffs and look at how the water is up there against the edge of the cliffs there. Now, when the water's coming in fast, they said it was halfway up the beach, but when the water's coming in fast and you land and you get there, if you don't get up those cliffs, you're going to drown. You're just going to drown. That water is going to cover you up and you're not going to have a chance. So this is another factor. It's all geography and water and things and the natural forces and the natural barriers, I should say, of the cliffs. So here's the rough outlines of the challenges. They've got to get these guns as one part of the mission. And Bradley calls in Lieutenant Colonel Rudder about a month before the D-Day invasion. So this is only the time that he just finds out what they're going to be doing to tell him of this secret assignment. And he says, you're at 6:30 a.m. on D-Day. You're going to be climbing these 100-foot cliffs. And you have to scale those cliffs under intense German fire, machine gun fire, and you're going to have everything. The cliffs are booby-trapped with German explosives, and you've got to climb in the face of those weapons and get to those 155 millimeter 6 guns that they thought were still on top. The second objective was to seize that coastal road I talked to you about that would allow Germans to, the German military to reinforce any landings on Omaha Beach. So they had to control that road too. So they had to get the guns and they had to do that to get to the road. Now, Rudder later said, I almost thought he was kidding when Bradley told him this, but he looked him in the eye and he said, I guess this isn't any joke here. So, of course, as soon as he realized he wasn't trying to scare him, this was the real thing, then Rudder immediately went to his men and said he was thrilled to have been selected, these 6 companies, to be a part of this critical engagement on D-Day. Well, they assured him that the guns might be destroyed. In any event, the bombers were going over there for several months beforehand on their way back from other bombing raids and dropping bombs, not just there because they didn't want to give away the landing site or the assault site, but they dropped bombs like this on other sites all along the coastline. And Bradley assured Rudder that there were going to be a lot of deep craters where the men, if they got on the top of the cliffs, that they would be able to jump in and hide in. The same thing was promised to the guys going in on Omaha and other beaches as well. with B-17s and B-24s dropping them. And they would be dropping bombs also on the morning of D-Day, right up until 6:25 in the morning. And the idea was the Germans would be driven back into their bunkers and into their fortified positions underground. And if the Rangers made it in on time at 6:30, the Germans just becoming shell-shocked a little bit out of their bunkers, and they'd have, the Rangers would have a few minutes of advantage against it. So before we get into the actual assault, let me bring you to one other hero of the story that I'm going to talk about a little bit today, because he is one of the key figures in this battle beyond Colonel Rudder. He was adopted as a young boy and grew up in New Jersey, in Mount Pleasant, New Jersey. Kind of a medium height, well-built, brown hair, blue eyes, as you see, slightly hooked nose there. I had the privilege of sitting next to him at the premiere of Saving Private Ryan and watching him through that whole first 23 minutes. Got to know him a little bit more later on. But he rose through the ranks, went into the Army in 42, and he rose quickly through the ranks and was there as a first sergeant on D-Day in charge of D Company. He was known for his cunning, his creativeness, his leadership, his guts, and almost single-handedly he transformed the Pointe du Hoc invasion from a failure to unequivocal victory. Well, just jumping forward here quickly to get into the battle. Again, here you see Pointe du Hoc in the middle, Utah and Omaha, and I don't need to dwell on that any further, but about 4 a.m., it's man your boats, and the guys are loading up, as Mike suggested earlier, that they're 11 miles offshore. They're getting ready for their journey into this battle. The water was cold. The night was drizzly. The seas were running a little rough at 4 or 5 foot seas, choppy. And it was still the pitch black. And they headed in. Well, you've got Rudder taking in the Force A, which was companies D, E, and F, and the others were heading off to Omaha, and the other force was of 2 companies going to wait for a signal at 7 a.m. If Rudder's troops made it up to the up on top and got to the guns and could follow in to reinforce them. Well, you've heard a lot of our historians talk about bad things happen when you start. The plan is everything for the first moment, and as soon as you get into action, the plan is almost thrown overboard. They weren't on these Higgins landing craft. They were on a LCA, landing craft assaults, which are not, this is the Higgins craft, but didn't have a photo with the guys in it, so I put them in this one. It looked alike, except it just had one exit out of it. Well, the first thing that happens is once the LCA turns over immediately and drowned 4 members of the platoon, and others got rescued. Then they go a little bit further toward inland, and another LCA sank, drowning almost all of its men. So before they even get to shore, the 225 Rangers are down now to 180. So things are not going well. They get worse now. They made a mistake. Those are the 2 things, 2 happenings that were just fortunes of war, or misfortunes. So they're going in, and all of a sudden the coxswain looks up and Lamel, and they say, this doesn't look like the right landing spot. They were going to the wrong place about halfway down to Omaha Beach instead of Pointe du Hoc, and they didn't realize it until about 620, 625. And they had to make a hard right turn and run the gauntlet along those cliffs. Now the Germans, the bombing was stopping, and the Germans were out of their bunkers, and they were running the gauntlet of fire trying to get up to Pointe du Hoc. So everything, the timetable is all off at this point, and Rudder knows it. And there's three LCAs or companies, three companies are struggling to get up there amid the fire. Now, the one thing that was reassuring was the USS Texas was there, and the Satterley, and with their 14-inch artillery pieces, they were just blasting the Germans along the coasts. And everybody talks about it that was there. The force of those shells and those blasts going right over the heads of the Rangers as they went along the coast was deafening. You could almost feel it. Certainly, you heard it. This took them 40 minutes, so they don't arrive until 7:10. And the Rangers companies, the A and B companies offshore, were supposed to get a signal at 7. Well, Rudder hadn't even made it to shore yet, so they were given orders: if you don't get a signal to follow in, then you divert to Omaha Beach. So at about 7:10, Rudder's first landing craft hits the shore, and we'll give you a little image of this. This is one of the right. The other one is a training film, but he was the first to land. Set up headquarters immediately. The Germans are out. They're grenades coming down, machine gun fire coming down, raining down on them, and he gets under a little ledge and sets up command headquarters down there to start with. Now, these boats were all equipped with rocket launchers that could launch grappling hooks 200 feet in the air, and the idea was they would grab the top of the cliff, and then the guys would use those ropes to help climb up the cliffs. The problem was going in, they'd gotten all wet and heavy, and some of the boats fired them too soon, and they were falling short because they didn't have the propulsion they needed to get up there. But a few of them waited, and they saw what was happening, and they got a little closer to shore before they fired them. So some of them did get up, and this one guy, Stevenson, had engineered and created a fireman's ladder, there was an extension ladder on the ducks that were following in behind them, that could be hoisted up to almost 100 feet with Vickers' machine gun on the top. So he's climbing up this thing while the boats are coming in and the guys are starting ready to climb, and he's swaying back and forth, firing his machine guns at the Germans up at the top trying to help. Well, that worked for a little while, but then they started zeroing in on him and he had to come back down. But this was the kind of creative stuff that these Rangers did to overcome this obstacle. Lamel was supposed to go around the point. Instead, he had to make a decision. He came in right behind Rudder. He jumps out of his boat and goes right down into 8 foot, but didn't know it, into the water, thinking he was going to hit land. He was in a crater that was about 10 feet deep. He goes down way underwater, and he's swimming back to the surface. He got wounded coming off the craft. He thought his buddy, not his buddy, but his the old fellow ranger at that time had shot him. He got almost in a fist fight when he got up. He was so mad. But they told him, said, no, it wasn't him. It was the Germans got you. But it was a flesh wound. It didn't slow him down much. So he just kept going and ran for the first rope, and Lamel started running up there with D Company guys right behind him. So they are grabbing any bit of rope that they can get. And it was tough because those ropes were greasy, heavy with water in them. And so one by one, they start going up. They're getting fired on. They're grenade, potato smashers. They're coming down on them, and they're going up inch by inch, breath by breath, step by step. And Lamel just gets up over the top ridge, just right before the top, and And he looked down and he saw Robert Fröhling, who was the radio man. He was slipping down. He was slipping down almost off the rope, and many had already dropped off the ropes and fallen to their deaths, and they were replaced by another one. But this one, he was going, and Lamel was up too high to help him, and he saw Reuben, big kind of football guy, big muscular athletic build, who was just above Fröhling. And he says, get Fröhling, get Fröhling. And he reached him down and grabbed him by the nape of the neck and throws him up over the top of the hill. And it was just all hell was breaking loose. And it was those kinds of heroics that helped him. And then Rudder moved his command post up to the top. This is a shot taken a little bit later in the day, but he sets up his command post here. Meanwhile, Lamel, and he had about 22 guys with his company, and they started pushing across the top of the point looking for the guns. Well, it was not as much resistance as they expected, but there were snipers, there were machine guns, and they were going from crater to crater up there to seeking cover, and they broke up into small groups, and they targeted the snipers that they could, and the Germans were coming out of their bunkers, different places, and in their tunnels. And they finally get over to the big casements where the big guns are supposed to be. That's the objective. And they fought their way across, and it was pretty fast. They got there, and lo and behold, it was nothing but telephone poles sticking out of the decoys for the bombers above and the spotter planes to fool the Americans and the Allies into thinking that the guns were still there. There was rumors before the invasion that the guns had been moved, but there was no proof of it. So all of a sudden, the number one thing of their mission, they haven't got control of the point yet, but the fighting is going on all around them, and Rudder is organizing the troops that are coming up the cliffs at the same time. And so I want to now show you something else here that we're going to see on a map in just a moment. So here's where they all are, right here, coming up the cliffs in this area and coming across these pockmarked areas. But here's the road that comes down to the coastal road that cuts across here. And Rudder comes down, fights his way down through here with his, Lamel, fights his way down here to the coastal road. Objective 2, he says, these guns got to be somewhere, but in the meantime, objective number 2 was to block the coastal road so the Germans could not reinforce what was going on at Omaha Beach and to be a blocking force. So they come up here, they start to set up the roadblocks. This is where those guns are, over here. So after they set up the roadblocks a little bit, and I'll show you this also on a map here. Here you can see the fighting now. You can see the German fighting here. The blue guys are our guys. Here's the coastal road. Here's where the 5th Ranger's starting to come over. Supposedly that day, they don't get there that day. So Lamel gets here, and he says, he and Jack Coon, Sergeant, they run down, and they see an area over here that they run down. Past here, they come down these hedges. This is not a road. These are hedgerows. And they get right down here, and they look over the hedge row. What do you think? They're the guns. 5 of them, not 6. The 6th one was found later by Easett Company on a patrol. But they saw 5 of them. And guess what? Nobody was there. The Germans were across the field, about 75 yards away. There were about 50, 100 of them in the courtyard over at this farmhouse talking. And this is now 8:30 or so. And you can, I just want to point this out. We'll get back to this later on here, but you can see where the attacks later come after they spike the guns. So Lamel takes out thermite grenades and goes in, and while the Germans are just a short way away, he puts 2 thermite grenades and knocks out 2 of them. The thermite grenades don't make a big sound, and they come up to 4,000 degree Fahrenheit in just a few seconds, and they melt the steel around the sighting mechanisms for the guns. So they basically inoperable after that. He goes back to Kuhn and says, "We need some more thermite. We got to get the other guns." So they race back to the coastal road over here. So they're coming all the way back here, racing back here, and then they come right back. And the Germans are still not there, and they put the thermite grenades on the other guns. This was really an amazing feat of bravery and courage, and Kuhn was covering Lamel as he did this. And the amazing thing is, why the hell weren't the Germans around their guns 2 hours after the landings has started on Utah Beach? Now, I had one of our guides take me around to some of the places on Pointe du Hoc. And I asked him, I said, "Have you ever been to where those guns were?" He said, "No, I haven't, but I can get my GPS and the old maps and we'll go find it." So we did. And this is the view. Now, if you look carefully here, this is the direction when you look out from where those guns were that we found the exact spot. I'll tell you, so we were going through. The reason nobody goes there because it's on private farmland. And so we found a trail up to the hedgerows. And German shepherds are barking and coming out. The farmer comes out of his house. "What the hell are you guys doing here?" He says in French, "I don't know what's going on." The guide says something in French to him, and finally he controls the dogs, and we walk on. And I said to Sylvan, I said, "What did you say to this guy?" He said, "I told him your dad died on a Ranger attack." Whatever works. Anyway, but the main thing is you can see this white line going all the way across here, right above the ocean. That's Utah Beach. They had all these guns sighted on Utah Beach. Now, they could have easily turned them around for Omaha. I don't know how easily. I'm not an artillery expert, but I've read that could have been done. But this is just amazing. I mean, within a 10 or 15 minutes time, he's got these guns spiked, and the Germans, who were supposed to be firing them, were 75 yards, 100 yards away, and didn't even know what was going on. And nobody to this day that I've talked to, including John Ron, who has theories about it, but everybody has theories. And on the German side, they don't really know as well either. So by 8:30 in the morning, they run back, you send a message to rudder. The message coded signals. The radio man that was rudder went underwater, so his radio was useless. So they were sending Morse code signals to the light to the U.S. satellite. That blow 6 meant that the guns were gone. And then a little while later, they had secured the coastal road, and the word went out that praise the Lord. So the two things, it wasn't under control by any means at this point. It was not under control. But they had blockaded the coastal road with a small number of men. They knew big, heavy German counterattacks were due to still come, but they had the coastal road and the guns were out and mission accomplished. And that meant a great deal to all those going in on Utah Beach, the commanders, and on Omaha Beach. So just to give you a sense again what's going on now. Now look down to the lower left. So there you begin to see the attacks that are coming. They're going to come in the next 2 days. And you have a perimeter set up. Now the blockage is over here. And this perimeter is set up with Company D here, Company E, and Company F. So here's Lamel's group, and here's E Company and F Company, and even a further outpost down here of F Company. And they're expecting, that's what happened. You can see all the German counterattacks that came later on that night. And this was ferocious hand-to-hand combat in some cases. It started around 11:30 p.m., excuse me, and I should be using the military codes. But in any event, flares going off, whistles going, shouting, tags, machine gunning. the Germans were coming at them with everything they had, and these Rangers were just stuck there. They couldn't get reinforcements. In fact, when they said "Praise the Lord" and the mission was accomplished, said send reinforcements, they didn't have the supplies because that one boat went down with their extra ammunition, and so they were really isolated. Rudder was sitting there on not sitting, but he was manning the counterattacks that were coming against the point where he was. And here are these outlying companies, D, E, and F. They're trying to hold this perimeter so the Germans don't retake Pointe du Hoc. So for that night, 11:30, and then early in the morning, about 1 o'clock, furious attacks. Then the next night, the same thing. It didn't end. At one point, the Germans reached the angle down there where E is, and they came over and they infiltrated, and it was furious fighting. There was a very fluid lines going back and forth, and it got pretty serious. This is the battle where Petty is now the guy I talked about earlier, the one 8 Germans. He was killing a lot of them over at F and down at that outpost. And there's lots of stories of how he did that if you want to get into it. He was about 300 yards ahead of E Company there. There's one case where German bicycles were coming along, and they mowed those guys down because they could see that they were German soldiers. And then they tried to bring a wagon across with a bunch of hay in it, and found out that, or they just guessed that there was a bunch of German soldiers in that. And they started unloading their Browning automatic and just wiped them out. And then George Kirchner was manning the L-shaped line there with 23 members of the 5th Ranger Battalion from A Company came in to join him at a critical moment. So one company that come in from Omaha Beach finally got there with about 23 men, I think so. They had a little bit of reinforcements, but it wasn't a lot. And John Ron and the forces coming from 5th Rangers, it got held up, and they were battling their way up the coastal road for the first night and the second day on the 7th. And it was just, it was tough. I mean, Kirchner said it was the first German attacks. He says it was the scariest moment of his entire life. He says it was just furious. And the Germans, these were good fighters too. There's one account from a former, a German veteran by the name of Karl Wagner, Wagner, you would say, from one of the Grenadier regiments, and the Rangers were running out of ammunition, and so they picked up German machine guns, the 42s, which have a very distinctive rattle, and the Germans were confused by that because the enemy forces, the Americans, they were confused whether or not that was German buddies in the night they didn't know, or and then guys, you get your head down. The enemies have got our guns. That's not our guys. And as Wagner writes, he says, even though we were vastly outnumbered, they infiltrated our lines, meaning the Rangers. And he said, we attacked and we learned they were good fighters all around. We were opposing the famous American Rangers. They were far better soldiers than we were. It's quite a compliment coming from someone who was in the thick of the fight. But the lines were breached back and forth, and Rudder finally heard the news that they were getting overrun, and he told companies E and F to withdraw. Petty held on till the end. He said, I don't know how a Ranger withdraws. We never were trained in retreating. So the lieutenant told him, he says, that's an order. You're going to have to figure it out. You're so damn smart. Just figure it out. And he did. But it was he was the last one to leave, and they ran back across out of the fields here, and they had to run across through hedgerows and things. So they're flooding back this way and flooding back this way. These two companies withdraw. So who gets left here? Lamel. He didn't get the message about withdrawing. They didn't know that they were left, and he's sitting there hiding in the hedges, fighting every now and then, but he was left there alone completely with Germans in between him and the point. So the Germans were attacking here. Germans had overrun here. These companies had moved back. And meanwhile, Colonel Rudder is fighting for the light, and he got wounded twice during those 2 days. As the Germans attacked, they were continuously dealing with artillery fire, with snipers, and it wasn't until the morning of June 8th that first Relief and John Ron got there at about 11 o'clock in the morning with the 5th Rangers and headquarters. So it was just one hell of a fight. Lamel said later that we never moved an inch. We just stayed in our roadblock and in our line there and held it. And he said the guys he was fighting with would have and did give their lives to defend that perimeter. Says we didn't retreat, we didn't withdraw. We all did what we were told to do. Now just remember, they're deep behind enemy lines now. They were 2 nights on that edge. Terrific losses were suffered, but there are only about a little under 95 that could really walk off the battle out of the 225 that started out. And Lamel writes later about his impressions at the moment, and said that, and I'll just read what he wrote because I can't say it any better. He said, as after the relief forces were there and he was surveying the dead and wounded, he said, "Suddenly I found myself on that road alone with all my dead brothers. They were spread out on the edge of the road, on both sides of the road, with blood, mud, and dirt, dust, and everything on their faces. Now, we Rangers have a brotherhood that is much stronger in many cases than blood brothers. And here I never anticipated in my life that this is what I would run into or see. But I tell you, this was a shocking thing to see, so many dead men. I don't really know what the real count was. It was over a few dozen of them. Anyway, from our company laying there on the side of the road. They were all my friends. We had done everything together, planned our lives for the future. We didn't really think about dying. I think most of them were overconfident, as I was. I didn't think anything would ever happen to us. But I've not been able to get that out of my mind for the rest of his life." Well, that's just another side of that. And in July, Eisenhower and all the big brass, Monty, Bradley, Patton, they were all there looking at these guns that loomed so large in their strategic thinking for all of this time. It was, they just had to see them and lay their eyes on what they had been working around all this time. But Reagan gives us the final tribute, which is what he did in 1984. When he said, "On this morning, the 6th of June, 225 Rangers jumped off the British landing craft and ran to the bottom of these cliffs. Today, 1984, as in 1944, he said, our armies are here in Europe for only one purpose, to protect and defend democracy. The only territories we hold are memorials, like Pointe du Hoc, and graveyards where our heroes rest." So Reagan's tribute was a clarion call in the Cold War fight against former ally, the Soviet Union. In that case, in 1984, he was sending a message not to the fascists who had been defeated and annihilated in the war, but to our new communist enemies, reminding us that defenders of freedom and democracy must always be prepared to fight new enemies. So these Rangers carried the war to the enemy and left us with their stories and the lessons and legacies of a tremendous action of courage and bravery on D-Day. What was termed as a suicide mission was almost that for the entire Ranger companies, but 90 of them survived and succeeded. So thank you very much, and hope I didn't go too long. All right, hear me?
Thank you, Nick. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. And I do have my own, but here's the first one. Nick, right where I'm standing, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor. What's the story on the 75 Germans that were several hundred yards away? Is there anything else learned about those Germans, why they were not manning their guns?
Well, I can tell you there are several theories. There have been, John Ron has some theories too about some incident that had happened a few days before that I don't know if it was an insurrection, but he heard this from a woman who was formed by the wife of the owner of the farmhouse, and there had been a kind of a terrorist blast. It might have been one of these soldiers imported from Korea or Russia that were unhappy about being where they were. I think that maybe some officers were killed or had just left the post in the days before. That's, I think, pure speculation. They didn't have anybody tell them what to do, I think is probably closer to the truth. And for whatever reason that was, I mean, this was 2 hours after the landing, so someone in command should have been able to tell them to take the initiative and to man those guns. Now, what we're pretty sure of is, according to the after-action reports, was that that Rudder's guys got into that observation post at the very front of the Pointe du Hoc and cut the communication cables. And John Ron thinks that that farmhouse might have been a communication center. Now, he's guessing at that too. We don't have any documentary evidence from the German side that I'm aware of, at least. And Ron, who studied this battle for both the German and the American side a lot more than I have, says that, well, their after-action reports weren't that good. Well, there was sort of chaos and retreating, so maybe they didn't have time to do them, or maybe they were ashamed of what happened there. That doesn't sound like the Germans not to record what the failure was. But there isn't any real answer. Those are just speculative ideas. It's clear that those 75, 100, whatever it was that they could see across at that farmhouse, we're not doing anything. And that doesn't mean the other Germans there were Germans coming up the roads at the time that they were setting up the roadblock that weren't obviously at the farmhouse. They were coming up, and Lamel hitting the bushes would let them go by because they were so badly outnumbered. There was about 40 or 50 Germans, and they only had, a handful of Rangers when they first got out to the roadblock. So there were some Germans taking action, but it wasn't the ones at the farmhouse. So we don't know enough about the German side to understand. That's the crux of it. So I don't really have an answer for you. That's a mystery. And Patrick O'Donnell and both John Ron and Doug Brinkley, boys of Pointe du Hoc, nobody really has an answer for that. O'Donnell is the only one that speculates a little bit, and Ron. Any other question, Jeremy?
I don't know if I see any, but I have one because I never got to meet Lynn Lamel, but you did.
Oh, wait,
Don's got one. You like Don? Let me bring the microphone to you.
back to England before they launch. The American forces are bottled up in these sausages and these narrow deployment areas, fat targets. Hitler has rockets, pilotless planes, okay? And they're all along the rocket coast of France, and they're ready to go. Now, they're not accurate. The bombing, had he launched these, would have been indiscriminate, but it kind of didn't matter because anything he threw in there would hit something vital because it was all smashed in there together. Why do you think the Germans didn't try to hit those deployment areas? They knew they were there.
Yeah. I don't have a good answer for that either. That question has been raised by a lot of people about why the Germans didn't pound into those areas. They could have gotten bombers in there. They could have gotten fighter planes in there. And they never picked up on the significance of the little bit of contact they had with Slapton Sands, either that the invasion was brewing. But what would you guess? Do you have a...
Let me bring it back to you now.
Yeah, Don's got a theory, yeah.
Here you go. Oh. The British had their best radar there. So anything that attacked that area would be spotted early. They had most of their fighter squadrons down there since the Battle of Britain. We had 8th Air Force fighter bases all over the place. When they eventually, they knew something about those doodle bugs, that all you had to do, since they were so slow, was to fly close to them and tip them
their wings
with your wings, throw off their gyroscope, and they're inactive. So, and the 8th Air Force had a fighter cap over the channel, and that would have prevented German fighters from breaking through, or bombers, 2-engine bombers, from breaking through and hitting that area. They had slaughtered that area pretty hard in the second Blitz, but they wouldn't have been able to. They wouldn't have been able to get through. It was the same kind of thing as the submarine blockade. So maybe Hitler's thinking he's gonna. Hitler also could have mined the channel. They had a terrific. That's what they were expert at, and they didn't do that for 2 days. And they laid the mines 2 days after the invasion. It would have caused havoc.
They did have some mines in the approach.
They had some, but they didn't lay their major mines until after the invasion. Crazy kind of stuff. It throws into doubt the whole idea of Prussian
it does.
superiority and anticipation and planning and things like that. The Nazi system was a fucking mess. And the bureaucracy, is at cross purposes with each other. There are 1,000 theories as to whether the Allies had landed. Hitler gets up really late. I mean, there's none of this regularity that we can stop in discipline that we associate with the fascists.
Well, and Ambrose would say that he thinks it was American showed more ingenuity and in the face of no commands, they would take initiative, and that the Germans would follow orders brilliantly, but if there were no orders, they didn't take the initiative to go beyond their immediate responsibility. So we'll be debating that for years to come, I guess. So anyway, there are no other questions, Jeremy?
Yeah. There's one in the very back, and thank you for meeting me halfway.
I'll walk.
Hello, Professor Mueller, and I hope that I'm not asking a question that's already been answered. I'm very curious about Lamel. How did he get out of that fix? He was surrounded.
Oh, well, they got relieved by John Ron and the 5th Rangers coming up from Omaha with the headquarters company. They got there about 11 in the morning, and the captured or killed the Germans that were still in the area, and that was the end of the battle right there. There was a little bit of friendly fire going on because they brought a tank group, the 743rd, I think, who was firing, because in all the confusion and chaos, they started firing on American guys, and actually killed a couple of them before the one officer ran out and started pounding on the tanks. These are our guys. But it all kind of calmed down by noon. The large force coming from Omaha, they did the exact opposite of what the Germans were supposed to do. They used the coastal road to come back and relieve and reinforce the Rangers. So Lamel and all the guys were safe at that point. They hunkered down. Actually, they were hiding in the hedgerows, and the Germans were around them. When they were outnumbered, they didn't say a word. They had absolute silence and discipline, and the Germans couldn't see them. Those, as you've heard, those and seen, your tourists, these hedgerows are really thick. So at nighttime, it's impossible to see what's in those hedgerows. So they knew when they were outnumbered there, and the Germans had infiltrated, were between them and the point. They just hunkered down, and when they had opportunities to go out and fight and take the advantage over a few numbers, they did, and then they retreated there and basically stayed there until the relief force came.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Nick Mueller.